Chaos exists to improve health outcomes for BC, Canada, and the world. Learn more at chaos.ubc.ca.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We're very pleased to offer a wonderful presentation of the work in progress today. My name is Jason Sutherland. I'm one of the our program directors upstairs in CHAOS, the Outcomes Program. And I'm very pleased today to start by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And today we have two speakers. We have Alicia Raimundo, how am I doing? Okay, is a project manager at Foundry working on virtual care. Alicia comes to BC with 10 years of experience building online and low barrier programming youth engagement programs at places like Stella's Place, Beanbag Chat, Access Open Minds, Ontario Youth Wellness Helps, Mental Health School, and System Framing. They have been recognized as thought leader for their work with over 600 speeches worldwide, including United Nations World Youth Day, TEDx, and Canada Senate and federal government. They've been quoted all over the place. I won't go through the long and prestigious list. And joining Alicia is Dr. Skye Barbic, is a chaos scientist, assistant professor at UBC. In the Department of Occupational Sciences and Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy, and the lead scientist at Foundry. So we're very pleased to have them today. We're lucky, and hand off from there.
Yep. All right. So we snuck into a free slot, and we were informed that last week, so we're really glad to have this opportunity. It's given us some great time to be nostalgic about our work together. I was a little nostalgic this morning. I went to watch the Olympic flame be lit, and 10 years ago, life is certainly different now. And then I was also nostalgic about my relationship with Alicia, and we met in a bathroom stall 5 years ago. And Alicia had just brought the house down with their keynote in front of about 1,000 people, and in the bathroom stall I said, hey, what are you going to do when you're an adult? And I'm pretty happy that they're working with us now, and really honored to be able to do this today. So I'm going to hand it off. Elisa's going to get us started. You know who we are. We have no conflicts of interest, and I'll give that to you.
So one of the things when Skye was telling me this morning about what was happening 10 years ago for her, I was reflecting on what happened 10 years ago for me. And 10 years ago, I had never done a public speech before. I had not talked about my lived experience, and I hadn't really even been engaged as a young person yet. And so it's been quite a wild ride and journey. And so one of the things that we're here to talk to you today about is youth engagement. And there's a quote here that says, when young people when informed and empowered, when they realize that they truly do make a difference, we can indeed change the world. And I think we have an amazing cohort of young people today, and you just have to turn on the news to see all the different change and all the different things that they're advocating for and the changes that they want. Throughout the presentation, you'll see this little key takeaway message to hear that Skye has put, and this will help just tell you different things that we're hoping that you take away from the talk today. Do I just do that? Okay, cool. So we're going to do an update on Foundry. We're going to talk about 3 different projects, and yeah, we'll go through it all. So the first update to know on Foundry is that we are expanding. We're opening 8. We're doing a process right now. We're going to identify 8 new places that Foundry centers will open in. There's more to read about that in the Pathway to Hope, which the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions put out last year. And if you're interested in knowing about that, you can read about it in there. One of the other really cool things that just happened for Foundry is that we were in the Throne speech. Again, we were in the Throne speech last year, and so that's really cool to know that we're sustainable and that we're a program that gets a lot of really cool recognition, so that always makes me happy. this is just to show you kind of like where the Foundry centers are right now. So there's, you can see all the ones that are operating and the ones that will be opening. The next one to open will be Ridge Meadows. We're also, that is kind of hard to represent on here because it doesn't live in a particular place. We're also going to be piloting a virtual Foundry Virtual this year, which is a virtual Foundry center in 3 communities, and just kind of doing a limited pilot, and then with hopes to operate across the province. And yeah, so it's really exciting. I don't know, do you have anything else you want to add, Sky? Virtual care, I just said Foundry Virtual. And that's a project that I work on, and it's something I'm really passionate about. So Foundry centers are co-designed with young people. I can talk about this from the perspective of Foundry Virtual Care. We've been co-designing our Foundry center with 20 young people, with a focus on young people living in rural and remote communities, and a focus on co-designing it with Indigenous young people, hoping that that Foundry Virtual is something that will appeal to them and something that they will use. And every Foundry center is co-designed with the young people that they hope to use the center when it opens, and that they hope will have kind of an interest in it and support it, and recruit people who would need to use it, bring their friends and family. Foundry has 5 core services. I think sometimes people just think about us and think about mental health, but this is to show that we do a lot more than that. So we do mental health, physical health, substance use support, social services, and peer support. If anyone doesn't know what a peer supporter is, peer support is people with lived experience like me who are trained to walk alongside a young person in their journey and support them through what they're going through and advocate for them, and kind of be like an older peer that's been there before. One of the things that's really cool but also makes youth engagement really hard at Foundry is that we have these amazing list of partners, but it really shows why co-design and youth engagement is really important, because it'd be really easy to lose the voice of a young person with all of these amazing people who've come to the table and want to help us make Foundry awesome. And so when we really center the voices of young people and families to just make sure that they don't get lost among all these amazing humans who are helping us. So we have a tablet-based data collection system called Toolbox, and so this is really cool. So young people, as they come in for walk-in services, as they come in for peer support, they will fill out what we call a health survey, which has a lot of different measures and stuff in there, and Sky can talk more about it. And one of the things that's really cool that we're implementing to grow Toolbox is, as young people start to move between different Foundry centers, as we know young people move around a lot, or if they move from virtual to in-person or the other way, that they only have to fill out the questionnaires and stories once, and the service providers in different places will be able to access it. And so they're not being asked to, for example, fill out a K-10 a whole bunch of times, or questions that they've answered recently. The Foundry centers have seen over 13,000 young people, which is a big number. And I think this slide's really cool because it shows you that people come in for mental health and substance use, but they also do come in a lot for physical health and sexual well-being. One of the things that's important to kind of know is that there's a lot of support that happens at a Foundry center that's maybe a little bit more informal, or maybe just a little bit more like in a waiting room or passing by. And so we definitely think the peer support and maybe navigation numbers are higher, but we're just working on getting people to capture that a little bit more for us. So to just transition today about why engage young people in research, and so this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. When I was a young person, I struggled a lot with my mental health, and really fought a system that wasn't built to support me. And I think part of the reason I get to stand in front of you today, do really cool work, but also achieve wellness, was because I helped created the things that I needed to use, and part of that was the research to show that these things work. And so when we're looking for benefits of research, I think young people are a group of people who change very, very quickly. I've definitely seen the case where we'll do some research on one kind of social media, and then by the time that paper comes out, no one uses that social media anymore. And so it's really important to engage youth so that you can work on the issues that are happening for youth right now. When a youth feels like they've truly co-designed something with you, they will be your biggest advocates, they will be your biggest promoters, they will bring their friends into something, and so I think it really helps get more enrollment, get more interest, and also helps disseminate the knowledge that you create and make youth-friendly interventions. It also is something that more and more publishers and funders are looking for people to do. The benefits for youth engagement, I think, are something now as an adult that I have experience as something that I show, which is that you get more involved in your community and change. You create the things that you need to use. You can create more skills, and definitely one of the things that's important is creating trust. I think sometimes an older community, younger community can be really not connected together because they don't feel like each other is listening, and engaging people in the work that we're doing helps them trust us that they want to take care of us and do more stuff, and then they become researchers eventually. I'm going to hand it over to Sky to talk about pilots.
All right, so I'm going to run you through 3 projects that has been a bit of a journey since 2017, and really embarking on this journey of trying to think what we're doing is right, but really the science of youth engagement was not available to us, and that it is a little bit different, as you've heard, from patient engagement. It's a bit of a different philosophy, a different mechanism of how we do it, and we've learned how to do it a little bit better through these projects. So this is a project, 2 CIHR SPORE-funded projects that I'll start with. It's a little bit different for me. I'm going to show you very little data, very little stats, and really just try to bring together the learning experiences and be a little bit more vulnerable to share these experiences with you. So these are 2 pilots, and the analogy to this is that many of us who've been on a plane, it's very rare that you sit at the back of the plane and you're panicking about your pilots at the front of the plane speaking the same language as the people as the air traffic controllers on the ground. And the consequences of our pilots and the air traffic controllers not talking the same language, and specifically not using the same units of measurement, are fatal. So you don't want your pilot talking feet to ground and your guy on the ground saying meters to the ground. You want to make sure that they're talking the same language. And the same thing is, what is the experience of a young person walking into a Foundry center, whether being here or in Campbell River, that they have full confidence that the people at the back of the center are going to fully understand their story and get them safely to where they need to go. So the CIHR SPORE-funded project was a little bit cheeky, funded by the Canadian Institute of Health Research. And what we wanted to do is, if we're going to build these Foundry centers, or these health centers for young people, health centers, we had to stop and we had to ask young people what health meant to them. And so it was literally a grant that says, what does health mean to young people, for the Canadian Institute of Health Research? And they funded it, which was great. And what our journey of looking at this was that the outcomes that we were hearing, specifically through the developmental evaluation that Amy Salmon was doing, the early work about Foundry centers coming online, really didn't align with how we were about to measure things. And what young people said was important to them in terms of how they define their health was certainly not what we were trying to measure. The other thing that was a challenge was that the outcomes that they were talking about weren't directly measurable. So you can't put quality of life or function on a bathroom scale and say you weigh 2 pounds of quality of life. It's difficult to measure, and that they really haven't been developed by young people. So the really easy thing was just take a measure off the shelf and say it's reliable and valid and let's use it because somebody said it was reliable and valid. But when you went in the underlying history of many of these tools, we found out that most of them were never ever co-designed with young people. This is always my public service message, and maybe this should have a takeaway, but this is just one of my ongoing favorite pictures in the world from South America of a measure where you add up a total score and it makes no sense. So these are 3 items at the item level that provide a lot of information about this town. They provide a lot of information about this. It's a small town, it's above sea level, relatively new town, up and coming town. Jackie, I always think you should move to this town. It seems like your kind of hot place. It's really good, it's warm. But the total adding up these numbers makes really little sense, and we sort of figured that out with a lot of the measures we were using. So the purpose of this project, it was a whopping $40,000 budget that we wanted to go across the province and talk to as many young people as possible, ask them what health meant to them, and figure out how to measure it. These were our specific questions. Again, what are the health needs of BC youth? And then how can we actually measure these to inform services? And so we weren't looking for population-based measures, which is really important. We were looking for measures that produce data that can inform a clinical conversation, can measure the effectiveness of clinical services, and could also give young people a sense of where they're at, where they're going, and how they're going to get there. So the original thinking was you have a young person on the left walking in. This could be just my sassy teenager right now, but this is what she looks like every morning. Hi, Mom. Did you make my lunch? But walking into a Foundry center, and the idea was initially the tablets that Alicia showed you, we would give them some information, collect some information, and hopefully that would be used to generate happy people. But that's really not what we found. We found that these measures were really not giving the information we needed to inform care. And so that was really the reason why, that we were just in this, not only were they not designed by young people, but we really weren't getting information that we needed to direct the services and to evaluate the impact of that. So we put young people first, and this is what this SPORE-funded study did. So key takeaway number one, if you're going to walk around the province in 5 different health authorities and talk to as many young people as possible and have young people collect your data, you want to let ethics know about it really early. And so ethics in this particular project took about 4.5 months to get through, and really thankful for the ethics leads at Providence to support us through this, but it might have been faster to walk across the province to each health authority and get signing off of this. We were one of the first people to go through the harmonization process, and it was quite an exercise. And so the idea that we had youth researchers on the team was a bit of a barrier. They were collecting data from young people was a barrier, and that we had 5 health authorities involved was quite a challenge. And so really takeaway number one, when working with young people, inform your ethics as quickly as possible. The other barrier was that we were just going to hire some young people to collect this data and to do the research with us. And actually, there is no such thing as a youth research assistant job description. And this is something that I'm more than happy to share with. But developing a job description for young people was a little bit different and unique. There wasn't some skeleton we could just take off from Providence to share. We had to develop our own, and we co-created this one as well. A few things to highlight was that when you're hiring young people and you're hiring them for their expertise and you're hiring them in a research position, we fought really hard to make sure it was $23 an hour. And so I can't tell you how many times we said, we'll just pay them minimum wage. And we were asking them to operate as research assistants, and we wanted to make sure that they were making the basic living minimum wage plus $2. And for Vancouver, that's $21 plus an extra $2, so $23. Don't read this, but basically what I wanted to see is the highlights of how clear these headings are. What is the job? What's the time commitment? And what will the youth research assistant be responsible for? And I love this because I think about all the job descriptions I've signed off on and taken jobs, and I wish it was this clear. And sometimes a lot of the job descriptions we write are so generalist, so it really helps people fit into different positions. But we made this really, really quite clear. Then we had to develop a hiring guide, so we still haven't collected one thing of data in a 1-year study yet, and we had to develop this hiring guide and simple things that we encounter with young people. This might have been their first job. They might have never paid taxes. They don't know how taxes fit into whether or not they're receiving disability or unemployment insurance. How does that all work? So we had a very systematic hiring guide that was developed and co-created again, and a hiring process. And we went out in the field and we met with the youth research assistants and provided a 2-day training, either together back-to-back or 1 week and 1 week separated, and we went through the processes in great detail. And this is what our training sessions look like. We provided lots of breaks, and so at the end of this, all of our youth researchers had very structured training, and they had gone through different study scenarios, and we had observed them collecting data, so that was exciting. So now, takeaway, getting started, hiring young people takes time. There's co-creation is important, and we're hoping to work with a BC support unit on sharing these messages so these materials are available for anybody else doing youth research. And then the other important thing was that center-level allyship is really, really important. And so we'd have young people out in the field, but we wouldn't be there supporting them, so we had to actually create champions and train people on the ground as well to support that. The outcomes is we had 6 very highly qualified peer researchers in this project who are currently looking for work, so if you're looking for them, they're very well trained. And we interviewed and surveyed 950 people across the province in these basically the green centers that are highlighted there. And we also conducted several World Cafe events. And what the results were was that young people identified outcomes that weren't the outcomes that we measure at the health services level. So no young person said, I want to have decreased emergency visits, I want to have decreased hospital visits, I want decreased symptoms. And so the outcomes that are important to me are going to school, going to work, having friends, contributing to my community. And what we did is we had to rethink about the outcomes that we had and the instruments we had to capture that. And we're in the process of developing 4 new measures right now. We've delivered 3 KT events. And the study has really been directly informing what and how the data is being collected at Foundry. There's 1 manuscript published right now and 4 in preparation, and the co-development of these manuscripts has taken quite a bit of time, but it's really valuable and worth the wait. So I couldn't help it, and I asked Alicia if I could sneak in this 1 piece of data numbers. But the really exciting part, and maybe the next rounds that I'll do, and it's a preview to it, is that if you are really conceptualizing what these health outcomes are, and let's just say as a general outcome of health, of how a person goes from low to high, and you can develop these measurement hypotheses with youth. So we've started to develop theories and underlying conceptual and measurement theories about how people go from low to high, and being able to actually test the extent to which existing measures and new items that we're developing capture these full ranges of services. And this is just one of the outputs that we do really quietly in the background. But youth are becoming more and more excited about these types of outputs, and the people are at the top and the items are at the bottom. We really want to have is items capturing the full range of the people that are walking into the centers and where the gaps are. And this is particularly important because 95% of our healthcare budget goes to the low end of the health spectrum of where people are in crisis. And what young people are saying is that health means much more than just being in crisis. There's a lot of other parts to it, and we have to understand that. So conceptualizing the outcomes is what we're doing. We're building these measurement hypotheses and doing live calibration now of these items across the sites. And the thing I'm probably the most excited about is when you have these stories and you bring data to the stories, what you now can do is actually map the clinical services. So what does it look like for somebody who's coming in crisis to a Foundry center? What does it look like to somebody who's actually quite well, but they're a little bit sad or they're worried and anxious about an exam coming up, but they're really still very engaged in their community? How do you support that person as well? So I'm going to pass it off to this. So I was going to start with this particular presentation, but the lessons learned from the CIHR project was that researchers, and me included, don't know how to really do this well. And so what we did is we wrote a SSHRC-funded project with a colleague in Toronto to look at how do we actually train researchers to do youth engagement. And so Alicia was part of that team, and I'll pass this off to them.
So I think a lot of what Sky talked about in the previous project is about can be about preparing young people to work with you, but as researchers, you also have to be prepared to work with young people. And youth engagement is very different than patient engagement. Patients tend to be older or tend to be people who have been working in the field for a little while, and so you don't necessarily have to change how you talk, and you don't necessarily have to consider where they're coming from. With youth engagement, you do. When I think about the young people that I have the privilege of working with, I work with young people who live in Bella Coola or on Quandra Island, and just the way I engage them and the way that and the things they have access to or maybe don't have access to are very different. We are doing amazing stuff together, but we definitely have to do it a little bit different. And I think one of the fun ways I get to do that is all my emails to them have memes or GIFs in them that no one other than them understand. But also that there's a lot of different ways to do youth engagement. There's a lot of good ways to do it. There's a lot of bad ways to do it. And there's a lot of different ways to make sure that it's doing what it needs to do in your project. And one of the things that people will say a lot of is that nothing about us without us, which is, I think, a saying that maybe older advocates have made. We're dealing with a group of young people who very much know if something is not co-designed by them. They can sense if it's made by someone who's their parents' age, trying to appeal to them. And so I think the best way to do that is involving young people from the beginning. So you can talk a little bit about what we did with this project, which was called Innovate. And so the colleague in Ontario, her name is Dr. Joanna Henderson, and through 3 different trainings across Canada, we trained 84 different researchers to be better prepared to do youth engagement in their research. Here's just who the presenters in Vancouver are, and so you can see that there's young people, and then there's researchers, and there's also me, which is that I'm in the unique position of no longer a young person, but mentoring and supporting other young people to kind of take the roles that we as older young people have left for them, and how to occupy that space in the way that feels right for them. Here's an example of an agenda for, I believe this is probably Vancouver, of the different things that people would learn throughout the training, and just the ways that we would host these days. I'm going to turn it over to Sky to talk about some of the outcomes that we found.
So the really brief outcome is that even though we had researchers, highly qualified researchers participating and saying that they were doing youth engagement, most of them were terrified of it, really terrified, and reported, they said that anecdotally to us, and in our stats said that their level of youth engagement was either low use, very low use, or non-use, and that the older the person got, the more and more terrified they were of the process. And so that was just one, but there was no level of difference in terms of their attitudes towards, like, they really wanted to do it. So whether they were actually engaging young people or not engaging, there was still this sense of readiness in those two groups. That paper is coming out too very, very soon. Happy to share it. There are some key things I think that we provided in that training. We're just going to highlight a few of those slides and share them with you right now.
Yeah, so one of the things that it's important to know about is that there's a lot of different ways that you might want to engage young people, and there's a lot of different ways that young people may want to be engaged depending on where they are at in their journey and how much time they have to offer. I think we always want to try to advocate for as much engagement as possible, because there's little decisions that get made every day that might make something less relevant to young people or less appealing to young people, and so I think we all want to do good work, and so making sure that those perspectives are there is important. But we definitely hear from young people that sometimes they do want to be on staff and support, like they were with Sky. Sometimes they're in a place where they just want to advise the other work that people are doing because they're working, or they're in school, or they're receiving support for their mental health and they don't want to be super present, or maybe they can show up to an event one time and just give you their perspective at that point. And it's all very meaningful stuff, but definitely I think a project, in order to really be true to co-design, needs to have a little bit of all of this. There's a lot of different roles for young people in research. I think it's really important, as you are when you're engaging anyone, to engage them from the very beginning, and make sure. I have an example of a study that I was part of that didn't do this, and someone wanted to do about how the different ways they can make a particular kind of clinic more appealing to young people, and then the minute they actually started talking about young people, it was like, I don't want this clinic to be more appealing, I just don't want to be here. And so that then you kind of had to pause and go back and look at what was being done. And so there's, obviously developing the research question objectives, supporting recruitment strategies and data collection, and there's also, with the data analysis and knowledge translation. Young people that have been involved in research have done really cool things to disseminate that knowledge, helping create infographics or like different whiteboard videos and stuff like that. And also they know social media way better than anyone else, and so making really cool posts on social media that have gone really far. I think when we're thinking about youth engagement, there's a lot of different ways to do it wrong and right, and I think when you're looking at the bottom of this ladder, you're looking about the kinds of engagement opportunities that are going to be really hurtful for young people. When you're talking about manipulation, you're talking about young people can't say no to people coming in and engaging with them, like whether it's a boss or a teacher has asked. If you're decoration, you're not being talked to. If you're tokenized, you're one young person being asked to speak for everyone, and that's really, really hard and a lot of pressure. I think I advocate for people to be somewhere in the top 3 if you can, just trying to co-design it in a meaningful way. And there's a project later on that Sky's going to talk about that was really, really youth-led, and I think that is really awesome. Different projects are set up in different ways. You can't do the most youth engagement all the time, and people appreciate that, but I think as long as there's meaningful and shared decision making, I think you'll see a lot of really cool outcomes because of that. So the kind of the take-home messages that we have for this is that engaging youth in research has really good benefits. I think we all really want to do good, relevant work, and so engaging youth, make sure that we're creating research that is relevant for them. There's a lot of skills that the researchers learned about how to design and conduct and implement research with youth, and that as much as we want to train our young people to understand research and do that, but we need to make sure that researchers are ready to work with young people, and it sometimes this can look like a lot of things, something as simple as not talking in pure acronyms all the time, or just thinking about the little ways that we're not accessible, having a meeting over your dinner and not bringing dinner, or having a meeting that's really far away for a young person who can't pay for transit. There's a lot of little ways that I think we're inaccessible, that we can be a little bit better. And I think if we don't plan youth engagement and we just think it's going to be easy, then the risk of tokenism is high. We sometimes can engage the young people that we know or the people that work with us when we really want more diverse and interesting perspectives, and we really want the funders to be aware and engaged early so that they support this kind of meaningful co-design, because it takes time, money, and work, and that we want to keep having ongoing training and developmental humility for our researchers, and so that we can all kind of collaborate together to make the most awesome stuff. Yeah, I'm going to hand it back over to Sky.
Okay, so I was relying on technology for this next one, but it's not going to work, so I'll try and fill in and make it be as interesting as this YouTube video, which won't happen. But so this is a really interesting project, youth-led exemplar, that I think will kind of anchor home this. I'm really proud to have been part of this work for the last 3 years. This is work led out of Laurentian University in Sudbury by a woman named Nancy Young and Mary Jo Wabineau, who is the health service director for a town called Wikmenekong on Manitoulin Island, so northeast part of Manitoulin Island, WICI for short. And WICI had a really great youth, first of all, they had a really big problem with youth suicide, and a lot of people, anyone who lived in Ontario knew Attawapisac and WICI had some significant problems. And about 10 years ago, they started a project with doing a lot of land-based canoe trips and 10-day trips that they would take young people out on. And they brought Nancy to start to evaluate the effectiveness of these trips. And Nancy came in from Laurentian University and brought her current PEDS QL and all the best quality of life measures that were existing. A lot of people from ISOQUAL might know Nancy Young. And surprisingly, the kids would come back, and everybody from the community would welcome them on the beach when they would come back, and they'd all canoe in, and the drums would be going. It was really exciting, and youth would come back just completely transformed, really tight-knit collective group of new friends and friends forever. And then they would fill in their PEDS QL, and surprisingly, there was no change. There was no change of like pre-post anything, and it looked terrible, and the data looked terrible. And so what the youth said is they were really frustrated by this, and that they felt like the researchers weren't capturing what was important to them. And so there was a group of 8 to 18-year-olds that came together, and they said, we want to describe what youth health and wellness looks like to our community, and we want to be able to measure it in a much better way. And so they got a bunch of cameras, and they sent youth across the whole island pretty much on bicycles, and they gave them all cameras to take pictures of what youth health wellness looked like to them. And they came back, and they worked with the researchers and the health service providers within the team, and they mapped out what these pictures look like of how youth went from low to high on this map. And so this is sort of what it looks like when they were all coming in from their trip, and this is one of the most beautiful places and vacation destinations I didn't know about. If you're ever looking for a place in the summer, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's up on, like I said, the northeast part of Manitoulin Island. You can either go from Toronto and drive up and then take a beautiful ferry, or you fly into Sudbury and come down. And so what this town was looking for is they were trying to shift the focus, and unbeknownst to me, they were working with rulers and talking about this illness to wellness trajectory. And they were saying that we only really pick up the needs of youth here, and we only really talk about the needs of youth, young people here, and then the scope of services is totally misaligned, and the goal is that we could actually align services with the needs of young people, and looking for that improved fit. And so this was young people really forcing leaders in their community to rethink about how they wanted to have services, how they wanted to measure the impact of those services, and really how they wanted to have alignment of these services with their needs, and to make sure that they were developmentally appropriate. And this is where I'm going to show you the video. Instead, I'm going to do death by PowerPoint and show you a lot of words. But the video link is there if you'd want to see it. And so what they ended up doing was imagine like all these pictures, and then they used pictures, and then they developed items that capture the pictures. And then they developed a 62-item measure called the Aboriginal Child Health and Wellness Measure, the ACHWM. It doesn't quite roll off the tip of your tongue, but it's meaningful to them. And it's designed specifically for 8 to 18-year-olds, and it's completed on a tablet-based format. And so some of the things are starting to link now with Foundry, that young people said that they can talk to a tablet. They won't tell a service director or anybody in their teacher everything they thought about it, but they will tell a tablet because a tablet didn't judge, was what the qualitative studies said. And so what it did is it gave communities automatically this new tracking, teachers, health service providers, parents, new tracking information about what the health needs were of young people. And the 62 items have a combination of very strength-focused items and items that put the next set of illness-focused items in context. So it's about participation, it's about connecting with elders, about connecting with the land, and then asking flat-out questions about suicide and risk to themselves and to others. And so the questions are really strategically positioned to get a health profile of that person from very, very ill to very, very well, but they're not starting with the suicide question. It's very strategically put together. So here's the link if you want to see it. It's just such a better video, and it's really designed by the youth, and it's pretty cool. I was brought in 2018, my first meeting in September, to share my experience of walking in as a white female researcher into this community, and it was a very matriarchal community, and I was invited by this team to come in and to start making sense of the data and to see how well the psychometric of the tool were working, and then also to start thinking about how to use this tool to map clinical services in the community. And so I showed up in my high heels and my very white woman outfit, and was really not welcomed very, very well at the beginning. And I stood up in front of a matriarch community and educated them about their measure, which was my first vulnerable big faux pas. And the young people in that room really said, "Hey, white lady in the corner, let me tell you how to do this." And the young people coached me about how to do this. It was really quite cool. And but it took a lot of cultural humility, which is where our term developmental humility came out. Because not only did we have to understand the culture I was in, but really had to understand how to work with the young people in that community. The second meeting, I showed up very shortly after, so it actually went better than I thought because I was invited 2 months later to come back. So we really planted the seeds of that your measure is really working really well, but it's not just giving you data that's psychometrically sound, it's giving you data that can help you have really meaningful conversations across your communities. And what I'd learned in the first community was that the police were using the tool one way, the educators are using the tool in one way, the parents are using the tools in one way, mental health, primary care, and nobody was talking. And so the second meeting was about coming together and talking and saying, how do we actually understand this tool, and how do we understand what youth are telling you? This was a series of meetings, and then we had our final-ish meeting in December, and I'll explain why it's an ish at the end. These are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9 organizations that are up in Wiki, and this is our group that came together and did a very sophisticated mapping exercise with the best resources that we had in this very small community of 3,700 people. And those of you who know me know I walk around with rulers all the time, and this woman, Natalie, she has 4 kids, but she is one of the mental health service directors up there. And she made this really cool ruler of red, yellow, green, and I loved it. And then she horrified me by saying, actually, our community doesn't do rulers, we do circles. And she took the ruler, she bent it, and she took another one. She said, we can't think about it from low to high, we have to think about it in circles. And that's really how she believed that the community would best understand this tool and the data coming out of it. So what we did is we paired people and members from each different group together and said, what do you do with a young person in the red zone? What do you do with a young person in the green zone? What are the services you provide in the red, yellow, green zone? And we got them to map this out, and I said sophisticated. It was on paper in a local golf course pub, and we mapped out each organization in terms of what they did. And this was actually the first time that the head of the education board was ever sitting in the same room with the WiP police. And the WiP police was actually sitting in the room with primary care. Primary care was sitting with child protection services. And we even had Ontario Works, which is like Work BC, in the room, because it was interesting because a child's health and wellness often depended on that parent working as well. So they came out with these beautiful service maps and developed this and co-created this with young people. And you'll see that I fought for the ruler to stay, but the circle is still up there. And they developed these service maps, and now everyone has this guidebook that guides what would happen when a young person is identified with their tool, whether they're in the red zone, yellow zone, and green zone. And so the red, they had kind of figured out within themselves that everybody calls this woman named Diane, and Diane puts them in the right person to connect them with. But they really weren't picking up the youth that were either going from green to yellow to red. They were starting to slide down, or they weren't even really helping the people just struggling a little bit, or the kids that were thriving. And the kids that were thriving was the big realization that every organization, non-Modwin is the mental health service, Child and Family Services, Wiki Tribal Police, every organization had a role to play. And so they have this, it's about a 20-page booklet that it really explains who to talk to. Sorry, it's cut off at the bottom in terms of phone numbers, but until then it was like call Joe, Carol, call Diane, call Natalie, and that's how it worked. And now young people actually carry that book around. They're saying, hey, I'm doing really well, and I have the capacity to do X, Y, and Z, and they know who to talk to too, so they're using that book. It's really quite neat. So moving forward is that these are the youth that started it and started this project, and it's combined with a bunch of 8 to 10-year-olds here in this project with education. This is stuff on the right. On the left is the elder with Nancy Young, who's a researcher from Laurentian. And this group that started this idea of redefining what health meant to their community, redefining ways to measure it, and now mapping services, got together and they wrote a CIHR team grant, and it was led by community with support from researchers. And it was a really tricky one because it certainly didn't look like your typical CIHR grant. Renee would have had a field day with it probably, but it took a big breath of confidence, and they ended up getting it. And they got $1.5 million for this community, which is a lot of dollars for this community to now share their methodology and to walk across local communities. They have about 67 local communities that they've been working with, and across BC now. So hopefully they came here last week, 2 weeks ago, to share this information, to share this tool, and to share the application of the tool. So it's much more than just a measure. It's an approach to how to identify and screen young people and support them and map your services. So really excited about this work. So we have 2 final take-homes, I guess. This was a quote that we used for social media to woo you here, that age is foolish and forgetful when it underestimates young people. And in these 3 different projects, what we've learned and what I've reflected on significantly is that, again, I said at the beginning that young people don't describe health as symptom-based and illness-based and systems-based. They don't say emergency visits. They don't say hospital visits. They don't say decreased scores on the PHQ-9. What they say is they want to be participating. They want to be with friends. They want to be happy. They want to contribute to their communities. They want to have family involved. And you can only imagine if they were in charge of building our healthcare system and research programs, how different things might look. And I think we have to reflect a little bit on that. And if you have kids, go ask them what health means to them, and think about how you can bring that into your adult research if that's what you're doing, because I sometimes think we're a little bit off the mark and they have a lot more to teach us than I ever knew. And then you're...
And I think I would just say that one thing that's really important to me and thing that I get taught daily by our young people is that this is a very empowered and articulate generation that really want to create change and really want to make things better for them and for the generations after that. And I think the tools of all the ways that they know how to use the internet and all the tools that they have, they're really empowered to do that. And so I think we're really in a place where I really want to use that energy and make something better than we've ever had before. And I think they're very invested because, you know, when the stuff doesn't work, it's the pain, their pain, and their friends' pains, and their friends' funerals. So I really hope that we can help them kind of build the things that they need to use and create something like a way more brighter tomorrow. So thank you.